to get better at chess. Gukesh, well, before making the first move, he adjusts all his pieces. He's taking a few seconds before making his first move, and he opens with pawn to e4. Magnus responds back with e5, knight to f3, knight c6, and the bishop comes to c4. We have the Italian, and Magnus plays a slightly offbeat line with pawn to d6. He blocks his own bishop, but this is something that Magnus has come prepared with. Castles is a good move, and bishop to e6. Wow, this is something quite unique that Magnus has come up with. Bishop takes bishop, pawn takes on e6. You have the doubled pawns, and Gukesh goes c3 with the idea of d4. It's clear that white's position is slightly better. Magnus puts pressure on e4. Gukesh defends it with rook e1. Remember, there could be ideas of queen b3 to attack b7 and e6. Magnus can defend that with queen c8. So he ignores it and plays bishop e7. Now notice the clocks. Gukesh has 9 minutes on the clock. He goes for d4, taking 30 seconds. Meanwhile, Magnus is moving fast. He adjusts there, and now castles. So he has a minute edge on the clock, and now Gukesh can push his pawn to d5, which is a nice move. He can also keep the tension by playing pawn to h3, but he takes on e5, and Magnus takes back with the knight. Knight takes on e5, d takes e5, and now the queens are standing off against each other. 7 minutes 20 seconds for Gukesh. There's some pressure on the f2 point. He plays knight d2, but he takes 4 minutes for it. That's a lot of time there, and you can see Magnus looking visibly relaxed as he has 6 minutes time edge. He attacks the f2 pawn. Now very important for Gukesh to play queen e2. It's the best move, but he makes a mistake. He goes knight f3, and Magnus is surprised. Why is Gukesh giving me a free pawn here? Thinks Magnus. After queen takes queen, he takes it. Rook takes, and now not only do you win a pawn on e4, but you also attack the f2 pawn. Gukesh goes bishop e3. Clearly, this was not his intention of the opening. Now he's fighting for a draw here. And Magnus Carlsen's opening idea has worked. Pawn takes on e3. Now, white wants to recapture the pawn with knight takes e5 when the position would be equal. So Magnus goes rook to f5, defending the pawn on e5. And if Gukesh wants to sort of have something for his pawn, he must take the 7th rank here with rook d7. And he plays it. Rook to d7, attacking the pawn on c7. Magnus quickly defends it with rook to c8. And now the rook doubles on the d file. White's activity is quite a bit, so Gukesh is very close to equality, but Magnus is still trying. He goes knight c5, and his point is if you come back, e4, maybe knight d3, all these are coming in. So best idea is to trade. And so rook d8, good move, takes, and Magnus now can come up here with king f7, but then b4 would be strong. So rook f8 played. And now you can recover this with knight e5, but after knight a4, knight d3 and b5, black seems to be better. So Gukesh comes back with rook d1, and I think that's a very smart decision. He's attacking the e5 pawn once again. Magnus pushes, Gukesh goes knight e5. Better was knight g5, h6 and b4 with almost an equal position, but knight e5 played. h5, maybe somewhere Magnus doesn't want to be disturbed with the move g4 coming in later. So he goes h5, knight to d7. Now notice rook d8 trying to pin here would lose to knight f6 check, and you lose the rook. So rook f5 played. Now knight takes knight, rook takes c5. And Magnus is a pawn up in this rook endgame. But this should be a draw. This should be a draw. Rook d7 is possible. Rook d4. Gukesh goes for the latter. He goes to d4. He attacks the pawn on e4. Magnus brings his rook to d5. His point is, if you take here, he gives a check on d2 and takes the b2 pawn. It's playable. But Gukesh, what a move. He goes c4, which is actually a blunder, because now the king and pawn endgame after rook takes b4 is winning for black. Can Magnus calculate this? Gukesh has only 13 seconds. Magnus has 4 minutes 9 seconds. He must take on d4. He takes his time, and rightly so. It's a very important moment. He takes on d4. Pawn takes, and now king f7. Don't believe this engine. It's losing here. King f6. The bar going up and down. Gukesh, well, he doesn't have much time. In the few seconds that he has, he goes king e3, king f5 played by Magnus. Now it's all about waiting moves. Who has the more waiting moves here? White or black? b4. It's very important for Magnus to play c6. We'll explain to you why that's the best move in a bit. But for now, will Magnus find the move c6? It's the only move to win. No, he makes a mistake with a6 and Gukesh must go a4. Again, a very important move, but he goes h4 and presses the clock there. That's, I think, the final error here, because now Magnus can play pawn to b5, and that is an incredibly strong move. And the point is very simple. When you push e5, you don't want d5 to come just as it is. That's why c6 is important, to keep the pawn on c6 so that d5 you can take it. Well, Magnus now takes his time. He has 1 minute 42 seconds. And an important move here. He thinks and pushes his pawn to b5. Fantastic chess there by the world number 1. And Gukesh pushes c5. c6 played. Yes. And now e5 cannot be met with d5. And the game is over. g3, Gukesh plays this. And Magnus can simply play e5 and trade off the pawns with a healthy extra pawn here. He pushes the pawn, and well, Gukesh, that's game over for him. You can see his face. He knows that the writing is on the wall. He extends his hand in resignation. Magnus Carlsen scores a very nice win. The pawn endgame was tremendously complicated, and we should try to analyze that. But for now, notice how Gukesh just says he should have played this move, and Magnus just shook his head. He knew that the position was roughly equal. Let's try to understand this pawn endgame. In this position, Gukesh played c4, inviting Magnus to take. And then we had these moves where white king came up, black king came here. And now at this point, Gukesh pushed his pawn to b4. It was extremely important to play c6. Now, the point is that when you go e5, you don't want d5 to happen. So, imagine that white plays the move a4. Now you play e5, and after d5, takes. And we reach this very important position where it's all about waiting moves. If black king has to move, white will win the e4 pawn. If white king has to move, then black can be safe, because then the e4 pawn is not hanging. So here a very important move is g5. And you will see that it's like black is going to win this tempo game. So for example, if white plays a5, I go a6. Now this is locked here. So you have to move these pawns. So you go g3, I go g4. Done. And now the way in which this wins, and just it's very simple. If you go b5, I go b6. If you go h3, I go h4. You are not able to come out of this. And now when you go king e2, I have king f6. Excellent move. King e3, and now this insane move, king e7. King e4 and king d6. And this, dear friends, is a position of reciprocal zugzwang. It's mind squares. The moment the king moves, black king wins the pawn and queens his e-pawn. That's the reason why c6 was so important. Now, let's go back and see Magnus playing a6. So here, Gukesh should have played a4. Because now if you look at the same position, you don't have c6. So let's say you try c6 now. If you play c6, I must go for the move g3. It's a very important move. And now if you do the same thing, which is with the move e5, I in fact am winning now with d5. Pawn takes, and you will realize that at this point white is the one who wins all of these tempo games. For example, g5 is met with h3 and you play g4, I take, you take, and I play a5 and you lose the e4 pawn. So this is actually very complicated to understand, but that was the point of playing a4 and now here d5. Imagine that in this position, instead of pushing the pawn to after c6, g3, you don't push e5 and you play b5, then I take cb, cb, and now a5. Again, it's the same concept. e5 is now met with d5 and white wins. So let's say you go g5 and now I play h3. Again, you are running out of moves, so you must play g6. I go h4 and now e5 will be losing to d5, so you go back and white is able to hold this. This is a position that is drawn. Very interesting endgame, but that's why you will realize that Gukesh actually went wrong with the move h4, because now he allowed the move b5 and it's no longer possible to, he goes c5, c6, and now e5 is coming with full force and it's a winning pawn endgame for black.